Hey everyone, it's Blake here from ChessPathways.com, and in today's openings video, we're going to be discussing the Englund Gambit. The Englund Gambit is almost never seen in top-level chess, but I'm sure that if you play the Queen's Pawn opening, you've probably seen it before, and it begins after d4, Black immediately responds with this pawn sacrifice e5. Now this early e5 idea as a pawn sacrifice is known from a couple different options that Black has against the Queen's Pawn opening. There's the Albin counter gambit against the Queen's Gambit. There's the more well-known Budapest Gambit, which begins with knight f6, c4, and only now e5, which is probably the closest cousin of the Englund Gambit. And there's a reason this move order is more popular than playing the Englund Gambit, because now if White accepts the Gambit, this knight's going to be able to help out and try to win this pawn back. This knight can come to g4 here, and if White defends it, now the knight can help out and the queen can help out soon. We've seen this in the Budapest Gambit. I'll go ahead and put a link down in the description to my video on that. But coming back here to the Englund Gambit, after d4, e5, after White accepts this pawn sacrifice, this knight's not really able to help out too easily to win this pawn back, and White will often succeed in staying up material here. So because of this, I can't really recommend playing the Englund Gambit with Black. If you like the idea of this gambit, I would recommend checking out my video on the Budapest Gambit and learning that instead. But for the rest of this video, we're going to talk about how to play against the Englund Gambit with White, and how to avoid some traps that Black might be setting for us. So okay, after d takes e5, Black usually plays knight c6. That's their most logical move, threatens to win the pawn back right away. White has a few options here. f4 would certainly make sure that you're going to stay up a pawn, but I can't recommend playing this move. I think Black's going to get much more compensation for a pawn than they deserve when they play this opening. For example, f4 could be met by bishop c5, and you've kind of weakened your king a little bit here. There's no reason to do that when other alternatives are very good for White. Knight f3 is the most obvious move, just defending the pawn, and that's the main move that most people play here. You can also play this move e4 and give the pawn back, and this actually transposes into a Nimzowitsch defense. Just to show you, after knight takes e5, White could play knight f3 or f4, getting the full center here, even though White has let Black win the pawn back. This is still pretty good for White. And this usually arises from a Nimzowitsch defense. After e4, knight c6, d4, e5, pawn takes e5, knight takes e5, and f4, we get the same position. Returning, though, to the Englund Gambit with knight to f3, Black will usually play queen e7. It's the only real way they have to add more firepower here to try to win their pawn back on e5, and really Black's just hoping you'll fall for a little trap here. A lot of players here will want to defend their e5 pawn, and bishop f4 is the most natural way to do this, but now Black gets to play queen b4 check, attacking the bishop and king, and this can go bad for White if White doesn't know how to handle this. So queen d2 would not be good. There would now be queen takes b2, and this is very bad for White. You can't really defend the rook because of queen c3, bishop b4 winning for Black. So queen d2 doesn't work. Certainly knight d2 and c3 don't work because the bishop's hanging, so White would have to play bishop d2, and now Black could take here on b2 and threaten the rook, and bishop c3 fails to bishop b4, once again this move, and White really doesn't have a good answer here. Surprisingly, White is close to lost. This rook is now hanging again because the bishop's pinned. This bishop is now hanging. If you take here on b4, they don't even have to take your rook right away. They can play knight takes b4, threatening knight takes c2, threatening queen takes a1. And perhaps most importantly, if you tried to defend everything with queen d2, then after bishop takes c3, queen takes c3 to defend the rook, there's queen c1 checkmate. So the bottom line is you don't want any part of this line. After bishop d2, queen takes b2, you should not play bishop c3 because it falls to bishop b4. Instead, you could play knight c3, and White's doing okay here. But I don't think there's any reason to go for this bishop f4 line at all. Going back here after queen e7, I think there's plenty of ways to get a great game here without exposing this vulnerability on b2 and making things complicated. I would recommend playing here queen to d5. And the idea is very simple. We simply defend the e5 pawn, and this queen can't really be harassed too easily. This knight can't really reach it because e7 and f6 are inaccessible for the time being, and Black really can't play d6 too easily without letting us exchange off this pawn and remaining up a pawn permanently. If Black were to harass our queen with knight to b4, that's no problem. Now this knight's no longer attacking the e5 pawn. Our queen can just drop back to b3, defending this c2 square and attacking this knight possibly if the queen moves away. And white has nothing at all to fear here. White's just up a solid extra pawn and is much better. So instead of knight to b4, after queen d5, black will often just play f6 here, trying to get us to take here so their knight can come harass our queen. But of course, if black plays this move, they're giving up on trying to win this e5 pawn back. They're letting us exchange it off for another pawn, and after e takes f6, knight takes f6, white is just up a solid extra pawn permanently, and our queen can once again just retreat to b3. It's really not too easy to harass there. I went ahead and pulled just one sample continuation from this position. This is a game played between two masters in 1990. Here black played d5, trying to grab the center. White played bishop g5, which is a pretty good square for the bishop. It's just simply pinning this knight, possibly threatening to remove the defender and win this d5 pawn later if black's not careful. And it's really not too easy for black to start kicking this bishop around. h6 would really weaken the light squares here around the king. So instead, bishop d7. In this game, white simply played c3. There have been some games where white played queen to e3, I saw, just trying to exchange queens and go to an endgame with an extra pawn. But c3 makes a lot of sense too. I think the reason c3 is played here is that white can't really remove the defender yet. White can't go for bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and queen takes d5 because b2 would then be hanging. So c3 just kind of stabilizes the center there a little bit from white. And it also gives this queen a retreat back to c2, which could be useful later. Anyway, the game continued castle long, e3, black did play h6 now after castling. Bishop takes f6, queen takes f6. Here, I think white really could have grabbed on d5. There's no specific tactic that really prevents it. But I guess white figured they're already up a pawn. They already have a fine position. Why would they want to open this rook's file and give black some kind of discovery here and let black back in the game when white can simply finish up development and have a healthy extra pawn? So in the game, white chose not to take. White played knight b to d2, queen f7 to defend the pawn, bishop b5, white's just finishing up development. Bishop d6, white finds a nice little tactical shot here, knight to e4. Doesn't win anything, just kind of activates this knight a little bit more and makes use of this pin on the queen, forcing this bishop to retreat back to e7. And now bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, and knight e5. It's clear that white's on top here. Just to show a couple more moves, queen e6, knight takes c6, queen takes c6, and now finally this knight has to save itself, and white just played knight to g3. And it's really hard to see what compensation black can claim to have for being down a pawn here. White's just up a solid extra pawn. So let's just quickly recap, and we can talk about some other options black has, but there really aren't many. If black plays e5, I recommend, of course, taking that pawn. After knight c6, we can just defend the pawn with knight f3, and if black plays queen e7, then queen d5 is going to be my recommendation for white to get an advantage. So in this position, we talked about f6. I saw that black's second most popular move here in my database was h6, which, I mean, if that's black's second best move, they really don't have an option but to play f6, because this is just way too slow. I mean, white can just keep on developing, play knight to c3. Now, there's really not going to be any more problem with queen b4 coming, so white should be free to play bishop f4 next if they want to. I saw in one game, black came up with a pretty radical solution trying to prevent bishop f4 by playing g5, not only stopping bishop f4, but thinking about playing bishop g7 to finally win their pawn back. But after simply queen to e4, white's threatening now knight to d5, kicking this queen away. And after just 6 moves, the black position is already pretty miserable. Finally, after d takes e5, we can talk about black's second move alternatives. We've only been looking at knight to c6, but really there's not much choice that black has here. For example, if black played queen e7 trying to win the pawn back, then simply knight to f3. And if black's not going to play knight c6 here and transpose back, then what do they really do? They don't really have a move here that makes any sense other than knight to c6. Black has sometimes played f6 right away, just giving up on the idea of trying to win their pawn back and just letting white exchange it off. But this certainly can't be an improvement. We already looked at how black plays this in the main line, and here knight f6 doesn't even come with tempo on the queen. So that's certainly nothing to be afraid of with white. You're still going to have a healthy extra pawn. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope this taught you a little bit about how to play against the Englund Gambit if you're lucky enough to face it. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you sign up on chesspathways.com right now. I'll put a link down in the description for you. It's totally free, only takes 5 seconds to join, and I will send you a free move-by-move guide to chess thinking when you sign up. Thanks, and I'll see you there.